Tonight, religious refusal.
It's not an anti-vaccine thing, it's a pro-freedom thing.
Even after evangelical leaders encourage their followers to get vaccinated.
Hi, welcome to Pastors and the Vaccine.
President Biden's push to mandate the shot against COVID-19 has some in the pews opposed. Plus, the president's plummeting approval rating and staying on.
The president remains committed to putting in place a humane and orderly immigration system.
Many migrants staying in the U.S., even amid mass deportation flights. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A third shot or not, boosters taking center stage in the COVID conversation. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
Welcome to Faith Nation, I'm John Jessup. Now that the FDA has approved a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine for people over 65 and at greater risk of the coronavirus, the question is, will the CDC follow suit?
Some advising the public health agencies say it should hold off on a decision for a few months, allowing time for more research.
While the debate over third shots rages on, some Americans still question even getting the first one, mounting a challenge against President Biden's vaccine mandates, claiming exemption based on religious convictions.
As senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells explains tonight, it's a claim that could very well end up before the Supreme Court.
For months, evangelical leaders have encouraged followers to get the vaccine.
Hi, welcome to Pastors and the Vaccine.
With all kinds of campaigns to encourage the faithful, now the president's new push to mandate the shot has some in the pews opposed.
Although many denominations and high-profile evangelical leaders support the vaccine, a number of people of faith also oppose it for spiritual reasons. And they're seeking guidance on how to claim a religious exemption.
People are entitled to religious accommodations under Title VII of employment discrimination law.
There's basic protection for faith in the workplace thanks to federal law and the Constitution. When it comes to the vaccine mandate, however, many aren't sure how to claim a religious exemption. And thousands have been calling places like the Religious Freedom Institute for help.
RFI, the Religious Freedom Institute, doesn't provide legal services, but we still receive calls with people asking, what are they able to do in light of their objections?
Legal scholars say the key is not a church's doctrine, but an individual's sincerely held belief.
The Supreme Court has made it very clear that religious convictions that merit protection are individual. I don't have to have a church behind me.
What we want to avoid is employers, and worst of all, the federal government becoming some sort of star chamber inquisitorial board, probing into people's religious beliefs. If a person says, these are my reasons, I disagree with abortion, sanctity of human life, I know that the aborted fetal cells were part of the testing, that should be it. That should be the case closed on whether or not they have a sincere belief. You don't need a letter from your pastor.
But Oklahoma pastor and Senate candidate Jackson Lahmeyer is doing just that, telling people that if they join his church, he'll sign their exemption.
It's not an anti-vaccine thing, it's a pro-freedom thing.
Berkeley cautions people to sort out their reasons and avoid pursuing this exemption if motivated by politics.
Religious exemptions are meant to be a remedy to a particular kind of issue, and just objecting to bad policy is not what religious exemptions are for.
Still, in the months ahead, untold numbers could claim them. In a telling sign, 3,000 LAPD employees plan to file. And the lawsuits have already started. The White House may have a hard time telling the courts that OSHA has the right to mandate a shot.
Think about what OSHA is about. It's about chemical exposures in the workplace, hard hat regulations on construction sites. This is conduct outside of the workplace that they say must be part of the workplace. This is a real stretch.
It's unclear how the Supreme Court might eventually rule, especially with weakened religious protection after the 1990 Smith ruling.
The government can win if it has a compelling interest, really, really important interest, and there's no way to accomplish that without infringing on liberty. And, when you're looking at a pandemic and people dying, the government is certainly going to try very hard. Even if they're under the tough standard, they're going to argue that we meet that standard.
It's a high-stakes fight that could severely weaken or empower religious liberty in the months and years ahead. Heather Sells, CBN News.
And joining us now, Dr. Ben Carson, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and author of the new kids' book, Why America Matters. Dr. Carson, welcome. Congratulations on your new book. We do want to talk to you about that. But first, let's talk about mandates. You were on the record saying that vaccines are good, mandates are not, adding that mandates open the door to dangerous precedents. Explain what you mean by that.
Came to America from all over the world is because this was a place that had freedom, had liberty, and those liberties are given to us not by the government, but by God. The right to lead our lives as we should without interfering with anyone else. Now, when we start opening ourselves to government officials saying, you must do this, you can't do this, you must say this, you can't say that, we really are starting to fundamentally change the foundation of our nation. And we have to be very much aware that that is a big issue. You couple that with the fact that you're trying to mandate something that hasn't been fully proven. We don't know what the long-term impact of this vaccine is, particularly when you're dealing with children. We do know that when you're dealing with children, you don't have a high risk from the virus itself, but we don't know what the long-term risk of the vaccines are. So we need to be a little more careful, I think.
Dr. Carson, there is debate, as we just heard in Heather's reporting, about the potential harm of claiming a religious exemption for masks or vaccines, watering down other religious claims, and that debate even happening among pastors. As we just heard the experts say, religious exemptions are meant to be a remedy, not for objecting just to bad policy. Dr. Carson, do you see a case for religious exemptions, particularly for masks? And if so, how would you defend that from that standpoint?
Well, you know, as far as vaccine is concerned, you know, some of the laboratory work is done with fetal cells, and that's a legitimate concern for some people, so I understand that. You know, as far as the masks are concerned, I'm not exactly sure what the religious implications are there, but there are some good developmental arguments there. Children, for instance, need to learn how to correlate the facial expression with what's being said. That's a very important part of sociological development. And if we deprive them of that, we don't know what the long-term effects of that are, but they can't possibly be good.
Yeah. So your book, Why America Matters for Kids, it's also connected to your program called Little Patriots. Dr. Carson, why did you write this book?
Well, we were concerned that maybe a lot of our children were being indoctrinated in a way that made them not proud to be Americans and not really knowing what our history, our true history is. And looking at some of the foundational pillars that made America to a great nation, our faith, our liberty, our community, and our respect for life. And bringing that to our young people in a way that is interactive, a way that they can understand very well, a way that's fun for them, and helping them to understand that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. And we need to be very wary of those who are trying to make us into enemies. And that's something that even our very youngest citizens should be able to understand.
Important lessons to teach even at a young age. Dr. Ben Carson, thank you so much for joining us on Faith Nation this evening.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, John.
Well, the COVID-19's continuing impact on the economy. New unemployment applications are up for a second straight week. Today's report from the Labor Department showing 351,000 new jobless claims last week. That's up from about 16,000 rather, from the week before. Although unemployment has vastly improved since this time last year, it is still historically high. Prior to the pandemic, applications averaged around 220,000 a week.
Here with us now is Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, welcome back. 3 weeks ago, we saw the lowest unemployment claims since COVID shut down the economy. Mark, how disappointing is it to have 2 weeks back-to-back of rising jobless applications?
It might be disappointing, but not too surprising, John and Jenna, because we know that for, among other reasons, the economy's recovery has been restrained by this surge in the Delta variant. Now, it does appear, based on what the medical experts say, that we may be putting that surge behind us. We may be seeing a peak or putting that peak behind us. And I do think there's reason to believe that economic activity is simply being pushed out rather than being destroyed. And that was essentially what the Federal Reserve told us with its summary of economic projections just this week, where we still have a very strong outlook for growth this year, but where it's being downgraded ever so slightly, essentially that same level of activity is being, let's say, put in the bank and showing up in terms of a higher estimate for next year.
Well, speaking of the Federal Reserve, it's getting ready to shift away from the economic help it's been offering during the pandemic. Mark, when will they make the move to begin raising interest rates? And what could that mean for Americans?
Jen, I think it's important to view this in the context of not taking away all of that assistance that you're referring to there, but rather dialing back on it. And so, for example, as we speak, the Fed is buying assets to the tune of $120 billion a month. A lot of people think the time has already passed that they should have stopped doing that, buying both mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. And so what the Fed is signaling, and Chairman Powell was fairly upfront about, is to say that as early as the end of the year, they'll be dialing back on that. And as soon as that is essentially finished, which we could see in the middle part of next year, then the time comes to begin, I would say, probably cautiously raising interest rates. Now, what that means is, of course, higher borrowing costs for those who are borrowing. We're still at record low levels in interest rates, but we've also been at miserable levels on savings. And so for savers, this would be good news. And I think the economy will still be enjoying the would-be benefit of accommodation at the hands of the Federal Reserve, meaning rates will likely still remain low, and that will help the economic expansion to continue.
Mark, as you're well aware, a battle is brewing on Capitol Hill over the debt ceiling. The Wall Street Journal published an opinion piece by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in which she warned about an economic catastrophe if the debt ceiling isn't raised. She wrote that 50 million seniors wouldn't get Social Security, America's military would go unpaid, and families wouldn't get their much-needed tax credits, child tax credits. Mark, what would happen if America defaults? Are these scare tactics?
No, if indeed we were to stop paying our obligations, including payments to the military, retirement payments and Social Security payments, and also remember the federal government is one of the biggest customers of business in the country, it would be catastrophic. I think the question is a default actually likely? And I think that even elected members of Congress, amid their many differences, understand that that is an unacceptable option. And I think at the end of the would-be day, they will avoid that step. But it's worth mentioning that we don't want to play this game of Russian roulette with the credibility of our federal government as a creditor.
All right, Mark Hamrick, Bankrate, thank you so much, Mark. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
A domestic agenda in peril, why poor public approval ratings could spell trouble for President Biden. When we come back. Welcome back. Just 8 months in office, President Biden faces the worst polling of his presidency. According to new numbers from Gallup, 53% of Americans disapprove of Mr. Biden's handling of his job. It is the first time a majority of Americans disapprove. Only 43% approve of how he's doing as commander-in-chief. That number represents the lowest approval rating since he's been in the White House, down 13 points since June, due in part to his handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal and a surge in summer COVID cases.
And let's bring in Chief Political Analyst David Brody now to discuss. David, broken down by party, it's not all that surprising. 90% of Democrats are happy with how the president's doing, only 6% of Republicans. feel the same way. The biggest shift, though, happening with independents. Only 37% of independents say they approve of how the president is doing. You know, at one point, that number was actually at 61%. David, how big of a blow is this to President Biden? Okay, I think we're having some difficulties with David's microphone. We are going to take a quick break. Be right back. The southern border at a breaking point. Next, a CBN News exclusive with Texas Congressman Michael Cloud about immigration and much more. And we are back with David. David, new polling from Gallup could spell trouble for the president. 90% of Democrats are happy with how he's doing. Only 6% of Republicans feel the same. Biggest shift with independents. 37% of independents say they approve of the president's job. At one point, that number was at 61%. David, how troubling is this for the president?
It's big time troubling, Jen. I'm glad you can hear me now. I can tell you that sometimes I do sound better when I am muted, FYI. But at least you hear me now. And I'll tell you this, it's not only a problem for Biden, it's a problem for Democrats, it's a problem for their chances in 2022, and it all is about those independents. What a major drop. So why? That's the follow-up question. The answer, immigration. The border, the border, the border. It's always been that with independence. Yes, it's the economy. Yes, it's COVID. It's a lot of different things. But ultimately, people want to feel safe and secure, and there is a concern at the border. And then you throw in Afghanistan, which was absolutely a debacle, and you can see why those poll numbers have really shifted.
So, David, what does all those polling or those new polling numbers suggest as far as the president's ability to push his agenda?
Well, you know, let me check. Hold on. I think I have Joe Manchin on the line because that's all that matters. Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. So in terms of the agenda, right, there's two tracks. There's the polling, independents, 2022, are Democrats going to lose the House and the Senate? And then there's Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and the agenda. Because let's be honest, if Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema were okay with the $3.5 trillion and all of that, it'd be smooth sailing for Democrats. And there would be a victory party, not just with the Democrats, but probably in the liberal media as well. And they'd all say, look at the Democrats and look at Joe Biden. Way to go, Uncle Joe. But Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have thrown a wrench into everything. And then, of course, Nancy Pelosi has problems on the House side because she's got AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and the squad to deal with who aren't too happy about the infrastructure issues.
Yeah, David, they've got to be thinking about the 2022 midterms as well with the president's polls.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And look, here's the problem. The Republicans have a tendency to blow things, and they could blow it. So this is the Republicans' midterms to lose. There's not even a question about it. Nathan Gonzalez has been on the air before here on Faith Nation, and he has it exactly right. He's the expert, not me, but he's right in the sense that the actual map looks good for Republicans.
David, don't doubt your expertise as well. CBN News political analyst, chief political analyst David Brody. Thanks so much, David.
You bet.
The Biden administration's special envoy to Haiti is out. Daniel Foote resigning today over the treatment of Haitian immigrants at the southern border. In a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Foote writing, "I will not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants to Haiti." In Del Rio, Texas, thousands from Haiti are still camping out, hoping to gain entry into America. That's despite at least 10 administration-initiated expulsion flights taking migrants back to Haiti.
Well, the situation at the border has many Republicans laying blame squarely on President Biden's immigration policy.
The CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson spoke with one Texas lawmaker who says it's time for action in the face of what he calls lawlessness.
Texas Congressman Michael Cloud tells CBN News his state is completely overrun by what's happening at the border and says it's time the Biden administration takes it seriously.
5 of the 13 counties I represented have already declared a disaster.
CBN News joined Cloud on a tour of the border last June. Cloud says since then, things have only gotten worse.
The federal government's not cooperating with local agencies, so it's our hospitals that are left to deal with it. It's our schools that are left to try to figure out how to deal with the situation. There's new diseases that have been virtually eradicated from the U.S. for quite some time that we're now having to deal with once again. And so this is a very serious situation.
Cloud claims it's complete lawlessness at the border.
You look at what's happening at the border, and it's just no holds barred, virtually open borders. The effort to intentionally overwhelm our system so that it collapses is really tragic coming from this Biden administration.
While the White House says they have the situation under control.
People are not coming into the country through legal methods. And again, our policy process has continued to be the same with Haiti as it is for anybody coming through for the irregular migration across our border.
Key parts of President Biden's agenda are in jeopardy, even after progressive and moderate Democrats announced a framework agreement over what could be a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill.
A big part of what we're talking about here, which is not a secret to all of you, are the size of the package, right? There are a range of different viewpoints on that. That's part of what the discussion is, and that will certainly impact as we look toward how we're going to unify moving forward.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is also warning Congress they need to act fast to address the debt ceiling before the government runs out of money to pay its bills, or the economic fallout will be catastrophic. Despite the looming crisis, Republicans have no intention of helping Democrats raise the debt ceiling, with Congressman Cloud claiming the solution is to stop spending money we don't have and live within our means as a nation. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abby. Still ahead, a kidney donor meets her match. A heartwarming surprise when Faith Nation returns. Finally tonight, you can call it one woman's big-hearted mission to save a life.
When Carrie Kimball learned that her brother's father-in-law needed a kidney transplant, she stepped in to donate one of hers anonymously. But that anonymity didn't last long. Kimball wanted to let the recipient of her kidney in on the news. So she surprised him with a sign that read, "I am your donor." Bob Scarborough was shocked to learn he knew the person who helped save his life. He says because of Kimball's sacrifice, he'll, one, be a lot stronger, and also he can hope to live a much longer life.
What a fantastic gift.
Oh, that's great to see. Good for them. Well, that does it for Faith Nation tonight.
See you tomorrow.